What a beautiful day!
So today we're going to be looking at the top 5 dungeons in Legion. Now these dungeons were picked due to aesthetics, lore, or the importance of the story, and just also how awesome they are. Dungeon remasters and reworks will not be part of this list. So while Return to Karazhan is an amazing dungeon, it will be saved for its own list. Boss mechanics were not taken into account. However, boss mechanics that interact with the environment have. So a charge is not important, but if that charge changes the layout of the playing field, then that has been taken into account, and that will be affecting the list as well. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Our forces have engaged the Legion on the ground floor. We must place the Aegis in the tower before our losses grow insurmountable.
Number 5. Cathedral of Endless Night. This was the second dungeon to be added in Legion. It was added alongside the Tomb of Sargeras raid, and it made the list due to its beautiful aesthetics. The elven architecture made it beautiful. You had a plant part, you had a spot covered by some spider webs, a beautiful library that we kind of destroyed a little bit, and the top of the cathedral was amazing. With its shattered elven structure, it was beautiful. I love how you ascended the dungeon, while Khadgar led an assault down in the tomb. I love the thought of being pressed for time, and the sort of special forces feel that the dungeon had me interested from the start. I love being able to look down and see the first room of the raid, and the ascension into the tower was even better. It does have your share of your average different Legion baddies, but the second boss is worth mentioning. His mechanics interact with the environment, which we have seen more and more lately, and I love mechanics like this. You better hide behind that bookshelf if he targets you. But watching the bookshelves shatter and open that area up is really cool, and I hope they add more of this in the game as time goes on. Nearing the top of the dungeon, Khadgar informs you that the assault failed and the demons are coming for you.
We've lost. The Legion broke our lines. They pushed us out of the tomb. You're all that stands between them and the Aegis. They are coming!
Illidan and Maiev held them off to buy you some time, but that again made the dungeon feel even better. The dungeon made you feel like you were there for a purpose, which Blizzard has done an amazing job this expansion in making every dungeon feel like you were there for a specific reason, and that reason had merit. I don't have a very specific favorite part about the dungeon. It all kind of flowed together nicely. There weren't many parts that felt out of place, so it was a great dungeon overall, and it was definitely worth adding to the list. Number 4. Black Rook Hold. This dungeon is an old elven fort that was built before the War of the Ancients, and during that war held off the Legion invasion. The hold was deemed nigh impregnable and stood the test of time. Even to this day, the ghosts seek to protect it from invaders. It's only too bad that they were duped by the Burning Legion. Black Rook Hold was originally number 5 on my list, but actually overtook the Cathedral due to its atmosphere, stronger lore, and overall I love this dungeon more. I know a lot of people disliked it, but honestly to me, it's great. The first boss was a really cool remodel with Raven Skulls added in. The old elven books, the little war table as you ascend the fort to reach the apex with Lord Ravencrest was a fun time. The second boss was also pretty cool lore-wise. Elisania Ravencrest, the daughter of Lord Ravencrest, imprisoned for a millennia in the Vault of Wardens shortly after the War of the Ancients. She found herself free after Maiev released the demon hunters from their prison. Returning to her ancestral home, she sacrificed everything, including her very soul, to defend what she could not during the War of the Ancients. We of course had to defeat her, but the lore behind her was still really cool. It's just a family that wants to defend their homeland, their fort, but the Legion likes to corrupt. There are many things that I loved about this dungeon. For example, the Raven statues, of course, because of the name Ravencrest, and the skybox was another beautiful thing to mention. Seeing the eclipse was perfect, and they nailed it. I also, of course, have great memories of the rocks rolling down the stairs and watching my team get destroyed by them. It was a pretty good time. The end of the dungeon was satisfying. I mean, who doesn't love a cool Dreadlord fight, right? One of the things I know people disliked about the dungeon was the amount of trash you have to go through between the fights. But at least you're treated to a cool atmosphere while you wait. Overall, it's a great dungeon, and definitely earns its place at number 4.
Lifted from our eyes. We Ravencrests have sacrificed much and more in defense of this land.
I see now we may rest, safe in the knowledge that heroes still live, who will defend our world.
Number 3, now Therian's Lair. This dungeon, of course, had to be a place on my list, right? The lair of the infamous Deathwing? Heck, yes. While I won't get into Deathwing and why he was screwed over by Blizzard, I must mention his home. The lore behind it is basically why it got its place on this list and why it's so high up. While the dungeon is good, a cave can only be so beautiful. We venture in there to obtain the Hammer of Khaz'goroth from the Drug Bull leader. While we're there, we learn that the stones and the bones still have power left over from Therian. In the beta for Legion, Wrathion was to make an appearance to gather more eggs for his father, but that was replaced by Ebonhorn, Wrathion's brother. The dungeon had some cool lore bosses, but they mostly focused on the Drug Bull and their defense of the hammer. It did have some cool transition sections, falling down the water at the start, or riding a barrel throwing a fish at the Drug Bull, or even jumping down behind a rock worm and going through its poop for loot. It offered also a few hidden paths to rares, but also a mushroom dealer that most people don't even know exist. The bad thing that I could say about this dungeon, it is a bit bland, but that doesn't hold back its interesting parts. Blizzard did a fantastic job on Deathwing's Lair, but more Easter eggs would have been a lot better. Something that's worth mentioning is the second boss. It seems that Blizzard does a really good job with second bosses for some reason. While his mechanics don't really interact with the environment very well, the whole guessing which urn he's in kind of made it an interesting fight, and an interesting part of the dungeon. You also had the snail race after him. And at the very bottom of the dungeon, you get to see the bones of these huge dragons, which even added to the aesthetics and the atmosphere. Now, Therian's Lair took number 3, and it cemented its place there, rightfully so.
And I am sure you will not fail High Mountain in this final hour.
Your souls will drift for eternity in the tides of the underworld.
Number 2, Maw of Souls. This won't be a big surprise to most people. Even my number 1 spot isn't a surprise, but the Maw definitely gets its number 2 spot with no second guesses. The aesthetics are phenomenal. You start on the ridge and fight King Frickin' Nimron, who was the last boss in Utgard Pinnacle. He had such a rough life, especially with what the Alliance and the Horde did to him in the Howling Fjord. It's no wonder he's pissed off at us. He does have a good ending though, since the warriors recruit him into the Halls of Valor as a Valnajar. After his death, you blow a horn, and the Naglfar, the ship that brings people to Helheim,
You wish for passage to Helheim? Then you shall have it.
on the ship, you fight your way to the front of the ship to get this amazing atmosphere of tornadoes in the sea. You rise from the bow of the ship onto the deck, which gives you this amazing view. It felt a lot like Grimmauld Depot, but it's actually a little bit cooler. And eventually you reach Helia at the bow of the Naglfar. She fights you, not really knowing who you are. She eventually destroys half of the bow and you're forced to fight her on her smaller space. Avoid mechanics becomes harder, but more crucial. I'm a sucker for some of the Viking things. Although I dislike the Thor movies, but WoW did it a little differently. They changed it completely, while the superheroes kind of just half changed it. Anyway, the lore on the ship and the introduction to Helia was amazing. We end up going into Helheim later to face her, but the overall dark feeling of the dungeon and seeing her for the first time was a huge thrill, and it cemented its place in my number 2 dungeon.
Do you think you have won? You have merely survived the storm. The seas are unstoppable!
So before we get to number 1, I have to talk about a runner-up. This was the dungeon I wasn't too sure to put on my number 5 spot, but that Seat of the Triumvirate is a pretty great dungeon. And the beta was a little bit better, having to jump onto the floating dungeon outside of Makari. It was better than just spawning on it and having it be part of the mainland. That of course didn't break my opinions too greatly of the dungeon. The whole corrupted Naru and the Ethereals working for the Void Lords made it a heavy lore dungeon. Illyria in the end was able to consume the Void, and it did not corrupt her, and it was a pretty cool moment, which eventually leads into the Void Elf allied race. This dungeon had some cool enemies, but it just brought up more questions than it really answered. Number 1.
Long have I awaited noble champions to enter my realm. Behold, the Halls of Valor.
Yep, I agreed with a lot of people that the Halls of Valor is number 1. This dungeon is amazing. Probably one of the best that Blizzard has ever added. I mean, just looking at it from the distance when you enter the dungeon is a sight to behold. We go in the dungeon to prove ourselves to Odin, who's prime designate, or was, I should say, of the Titan Keepers, set to watch over Azeroth. He left Ulduar after the dragon aspects helped in a war against Galakrond. He stated that only the Titan Forge could be trusted to defend Azeroth. The aspects were empowered despite his objectifications, so Odin took a section of Ulduar and raised it to the sky, creating the Halls of Valor. We need the Ages of Agrimar, and we have to prove ourselves to him so we can take it. The feasting halls were actually really badass, which led to Aegir, the ungrateful Valkyr in which the Alliance saved from Sylvanas, who had the pact with Helya. Yeah, you're welcome, Aegir, but the Ascendant's room is a sight to behold as well. But there was one part in the dungeon which brought so much heartache, but awe to people as well. And that is the Field of Eternal Hunt. This is basically a zone within the dungeon, and I have to say, I wish it was a zone we could quest in. The fields are beautiful, and the snowy mountains in the background made the atmosphere incredible. Of course, Fenrir is there, which apparently is the deadliest dungeon boss. He's killed more people than any other dungeon boss, according to Blizzard, in December 2016. But it was fun to watch people try and go the wrong way, not looking for his footprints, which also added another really cool part to the dungeon, that the boss could be in 2 different places. It was such a fun time at the start of the expansion. The walkway up to Odin's Gladiator Sanctum was perfectly executed and showed the importance of our arrival. We even got to face off against God King Skovald, whom of which had a really cool armor set. And then we fight Odin himself, because he missed the thrill of battle. Of course, the one bad thing I will say about the dungeon is he never wrote our names in the halls. I'm actually still waiting. Thank you everyone for watching my video on the top 5 dungeons in Legion. I'd really like to revisit something like this in the future. Maybe something for Mop, WoD, Wrath. And I had a ton of fun recording, although I did run into some technical issues. Which I apologize about in Therian's Lair video. It kind of looks a little subpar, and that's because I ran into technical issues. Basically, OBS said you didn't restart your computer properly, so now everything's going to suck because I reset myself. But if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. And if you would like to see me do this again, which expansion would you like to see? I, of course, love going down the nostalgia path, so I'd be more than happy to do it. But thank you guys very much for watching. I am Videnji and Rhino, and I will see you in the next video.